A quiet man sleeping beneath a bridge saves a pregnant stranger from an ambush. The next day, a mysterious offer threatens to rewrite his entire life. What he doesn't know is, he's being watched, and this was never a coincidence. The city never truly slept. It just shifted moods, from the glaring impatience of daylight to the thick, brooding silence of night. Under the bridges and behind abandoned factories, in places long forgotten by developers and city planners, life still pulsed, quietly, desperately. Beneath an overpass strewn with old newspapers, graffiti-stained concrete, and the occasional discarded needle, Eli Mercer stirred from a restless sleep. The night had been colder than usual for spring. His joints ached, his back throbbed from nights without a real mattress. He rubbed his hands together and blew into them for warmth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The world had moved on without him. Once he would have been rising at dawn for a PT run with his platoon. Now he rose to the sound of traffic above and rats scurrying in the gutter. A thick, greying beard covered most of his face, and a knit cap barely contained the tangled mess of his hair. His most valuable possession, aside from the sleeping bag he'd stitched a dozen times, was a folded American flag wrapped in plastic, kept inside a rusted duffel bag. Few people stopped to ask his name. Fewer still cared to know his story. But the truth was burned into his skin like the ink on his shoulder. Sergeant Eli Mercer, U.S. Army. 2 tours, 1 Bronze Star, 2 friends lost, and 1 dishonorable discharge after the system he served turned on him when he couldn't turn off the war inside his head. He took his time waking up, shaking the stiffness from his limbs. Around him, the city rumbled back to life. Cars passed overhead. Somewhere nearby, a train moaned on its tracks. Eli scanned the streets with the alertness that never quite left him. Even in his sleep he heard things others didn't. That's when he heard it, a muffled sound. Footsteps, fast, erratic. A figure darted across the far end of the underpass, half running, half limping. A woman, mid-30s, visibly pregnant. Her coat was torn, one sleeve dangling, and her breathing ragged. Her eyes flicked behind her as she stumbled into view, cradling her stomach protectively. Then came the second sound. 3 more sets of footsteps, heavier, unhurried. Eli didn't move at first. He watched, assessed. 3 young men, maybe early 20s, approached from the alley. Hooded, faces half covered, their body language was unmistakable. Not drunk, not curious. Hunting. One called out, "Where are you going, sweetheart?" You dropped. Something. Your dignity. The other 2 laughed. The woman turned sharply and tried to back away, but her ankle gave out, and she dropped to one knee. Her phone clattered to the ground beside her, cracked, broken. The lead man stepped closer, pulling something from his coat. A blade. Eli rose. Years of disuse hadn't dulled his instincts. He reached behind a stack of crates and pulled out a rusted metal pipe, a makeshift walking stick he had reshaped into something more. His body was sore, slower than it had once been, but his mind was precise. He stepped forward silently. The woman didn't see him yet. The men didn't either. "You don't want to do this," Eli said, voice like gravel. All 3 turned. One of them snorted. "Who the hell are you? Her grandpa?" Eli didn't flinch. "I won't ask again," he said, stepping closer, pipe still lowered. "Walk away." Another chuckle. Then one of them lunged. Eli shifted his weight, ducked the attack, and drove the pipe into the man's ribs. A scream followed. The second man swung wildly. Eli blocked it with his forearm, then dropped him with a quick jab to the knee. The third paused, looked at his fallen friends, then took off running into the shadows. The woman gasped for breath, her back against the cold concrete wall, eyes wide. "You okay?" Eli asked, still scanning the darkness. She nodded slowly. I think so. My baby." He didn't come closer, just stood guard until he was certain they were alone. Sirens, faint but approaching, began to echo down the street. "There's a bench across the street," Eli said. "More light, cameras, go there." She hesitated, then nodded. Her legs trembled, but she stood. He followed at a distance until she was seated, then turned and vanished back into the underpass before the flashing lights arrived. By morning, the city had a new obsession. A grainy photo pulled from a surveillance camera showed Eli, half in, shadow, pipe in hand, standing between the woman and her attackers. News stations called him the Phantom Veteran. A bystander's short video clip taken just after the assault was uploaded to social media and went viral. Hashtags spread. Debates erupted. Interviews followed. The woman, identified only as Tessa, gave a statement from her hospital bed. She was stable, her child unharmed. She spoke about her unnamed protector with tears in her eyes. "He saved my life. I didn't even get to thank him." Across the river, Eli sat on a bench outside a laundromat. A coffee cup, salvaged from a trash can, warmed his fingers. He hadn't seen the news, but he'd felt the shift. People looked at him differently now. A few nodded. One woman offered him a wrapped sandwich. He accepted it with a small nod, then tucked it away for later. The world was moving, pulling him into something he didn't ask for. A black SUV pulled up beside the curb. It was sleek, quiet, too clean for this side of town. Eli eyed it, not moving. The driver's door opened. A man in his 60s stepped out, wearing a long overcoat, hair silver and combed back. He moved with the confidence of someone who never had to worry about his next meal. He approached Eli with the caution of someone who understood soldiers. "You're Eli Mercer," he said. It wasn't a question. Eli didn't answer. "My name is Grayson Locke. I represent a private organization. Someone saw what you did last night. They'd like to speak with you." Eli narrowed his eyes. "I'm not interested in fame or charity." Locke smiled faintly and extended a card. "Neither are we. What's being offered is different, if you're willing to hear it." Eli didn't take the card right away. He stared at it, then at Locke. "What's the catch?" Locke's smile faded. "You'll want to ask that question tomorrow, noon. The address is on the card. Just show up." He turned and returned to the SUV, leaving Eli alone with the card in hand. A symbol was embossed in silver on the front, a phoenix rising from ash. Eli stared at it a long time, then tucked it into his coat. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the city, sirens cried again. Tomorrow would be different. The city morning was loud, unkind, clattering wheels on pavement, distant sirens slicing through honks and curses. For most people, it was just the start of another Tuesday. For Eli Mercer, it was another reminder that he didn't belong here or anywhere anymore. He walked the sidewalks with his shoulders slightly hunched, not from cold, but from years of weight no one else could see. His boots, still military-grade, were battered and dusted white from salt-stained streets. He carried no phone, no ID, no visible past. Only the flag in his duffel, the pipe he kept hidden, and a worn photo of 3 men in uniform, all smiling. He never smiled in it. The image was creased from how often he unfolded it, stared at it, tried to remember the feeling before things fell apart. That morning, as he sat on a park bench in the warehouse district, Eli pulled the card from his coat. Again. Its edges were sharp, clean. The silver phoenix emblem shimmered in the sunlight. He didn't trust anything that polished. It reminded him of the medals handed out at ceremonies, shiny, hollow things that never told the full story. Grayson Locke. The man had spoken like someone who didn't waste words. It made Eli uneasy. People like that were usually dangerous, and not in the ways most folks expected. He didn't know what they wanted from him. He only knew that someone was watching. That felt too familiar. He gritted his teeth and checked. The time on a stranger's discarded newspaper, 11:37 a.m. The card said noon. The address was in a neighborhood across town near the riverfront. Old money, steel fences, homes with gates and lawns that didn't have litter in the grass. Eli had time to walk, but not much. He folded the paper, tucked the card back into his coat, and stood up. As he walked, Eli's thoughts drifted back, not to the war, but to what came after. Returning home hadn't felt like coming home. The uniform came off, the parades ended, and the cold silence began. He had expected nightmares. He hadn't expected isolation. His brothers in arms were scattered, some drinking themselves to death, others just gone. The VA appointments were always late. The medications numbed him more than the trauma, and then came the day everything collapsed. It wasn't a headline story. There were no newspaper clippings to mark the fall, just a foggy moment in a bar when a man got too close, too loud, too sudden. Eli didn't remember throwing the punch. He only remembered the fear in the bartender's eyes and the sounds of sirens again. A dishonorable discharge came after a second incident. No more benefits, no more help. Just the label, unfit, volatile, disposable. After that, the streets welcomed him quietly. No ceremony, no support, just pavement and silence. He passed. A group of young kids laughing as they chased pigeons across a plaza. One of them tripped and scraped his knee. Eli paused, watching as the boy's mother rushed to help him up. She kissed the bruise and gave him a tissue. The boy stopped crying almost immediately. He kept walking, but that small moment stayed with him longer than he expected. Eli stood in front of the address. It was a townhouse, narrow and tall, made of red brick and black steel beams, modern, quiet, cameras in every corner, the kind of place that hid more than it showed. The door opened before he could knock. Grayson Locke stood there, still crisp, still watching. "You came." Eli stepped in without replying. The inside was even cleaner, too clean. White walls, glass partitions, a minimalist black and gold aesthetic. It didn't feel like a home, more like a high-end waiting room for decisions that would change lives. They entered a small lounge area. A table was set with tea and a plate of untouched fruit. Eli remained standing. Locke gestured toward a seat. "Please." After a long pause, Eli sat. "You were watched," Locke said. "I figured. We have eyes on key neighborhoods. You weren't the target, not originally. The woman was. But you inserted yourself in a way we didn't anticipate." Eli's brow furrowed. "You knew she was in danger. We suspected it. We just didn't expect a homeless veteran to become the variable." Eli's fingers curled slightly. So I screwed up your plan. Locke smiled faintly. No, you revealed something we weren't looking for, but perhaps needed to see. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin file, placed it on the table. We ran a check on you. Eli Mercer, born 1984, enlisted at 18, 2 tours. Commendations for valor. Then, the rest. Eli didn't move. We know the VA failed you. We know about the bar fights, the psych evals, the dishonorable discharge. He opened the file and tapped on a document. We also know you kept saving people unofficially. In shelters, in alleys. You stopped a drug dealer from recruiting teens in Garfield Heights, pulled a kid out of a burning car 2 years ago. Never stayed long enough for a thank you. Eli said nothing. He stared at the wall behind Locke, expression unreadable. We believe in second chapters, Locke said. Eli's eyes shifted to him, sharp now. What's the offer? Locke leaned forward slightly. There's a man with significant resources. He runs a private intelligence network, off the books. Humanitarian, protection-based, not government-sanctioned, but legal. Technically, Eli asked. There are rules, but there's also freedom. You'd have housing, income, purpose, a team, training to update your skills, and most importantly, targets worth stopping. Eli's fingers tapped slowly against his thigh. And if I say no, then you walk out that door, and we never contact you again. Your name remains buried, no press, no attention, just the streets. Eli didn't respond right away. He reached into his duffel and pulled out the photo of his old squad, held it loosely in one hand. One of them, he murmured, the one on the left. Name was Dawson. We saved a village once, 12 kids. He said that was his proudest day in uniform. Locke listened in silence. They gave him a medal. Buried him with it after he blew his brains out 6 months later. Proudest day. Didn't matter by then. He folded the photo again, slowly. I've had chances to die, Eli said. Haven't yet. So maybe that means I'm supposed to still be doing something. He slid the photo back into his bag. Locke didn't press. He simply nodded. Then, we begin tomorrow. That night, Eli slept indoors for the first time in 6 years. The room was simple, a firm bed, a clean bathroom, and a lamp beside a bookshelf filled with biographies of soldiers, spies, and revolutionaries. On the desk, someone had placed a set of folded clothes, military style. He didn't dream that night, but he woke before dawn, sat up straight, and stared at the rising sun through the window as if seeing it for the first time. A mission awaited. The sun had barely crested the edge of the skyline when Eli stood in front of a plain steel door on the edge of a decommissioned naval yard. The compound looked forgotten, no markings, no guards in view, but he knew better. The air buzzed with invisible eyes, and somewhere behind the metal walls, the true machinery of this world turned quietly, precisely. This wasn't boot camp. This wasn't even war. This was something else entirely. Grayson Locke met him at the door without a word and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that everything was about to begin. They entered a long corridor lit only by soft blue LED strips. The air was cool, sterile, like a hospital or a server room. Every sound, footsteps, breath, even Eli's heartbeat, felt amplified in the stillness. Finally, they arrived at a glass chamber where 3 others waited. A tall woman with a scar running down her jaw. A lean man wearing glasses, his arms crossed tightly, and a younger man with sleeves rolled up, hands twitching as though they couldn't sit still. They were watching screens. grainy black and white feeds from hidden surveillance cameras. Locke gestured toward the monitors. Test begins now. No more preamble, no briefing, just motion. Eli's eyes tracked the footage. It was a warehouse 2 blocks over, dark, poorly lit. Inside, a girl sat tied to a chair, maybe 16, frightened, unharmed for now. 2 men paced nearby, armed but casual, complacent, probably hired muscle. Locke leaned closer. Her name is Mia, staged abduction. Actors, weapons non-lethal. But the threat is real to her. She believes she's truly in danger. Eli didn't blink. What's the objective? He asked. Locke's voice was flat. Extract the girl, neutralize the threats, do it without being seen. One mistake, and it's over. Eli processed the layout. 1 entrance, 1 upper-level catwalk, pallets stacked against the north wall, and a flickering security light that would be his blind spot. He turned to leave. The younger man with twitchy hands called after him, "You're not even going to plan." Eli paused, only long enough to reply, "I've been planning since I saw the feed." Then he vanished into the hallway. The warehouse loomed ahead, old, rusted, silent but alive. Eli crouched behind a loading container, every nerve alert. The wind shifted faintly, carrying the scent of machine oil and dust. He moved quickly, silent as breath. 1 minute later he was inside. The girl whimpered once, muffled by the gag. The guards didn't react. They were distracted. One watching. A football video on his phone, the other picking at his fingernails with a knife, Eli calculated. 10 seconds between their patrol loops. 4 seconds to cross the aisle, 2 to knock out 1 guard, another 6 to disable the second. Too many chances. For noise. Instead, he adjusted. He crept onto the catwalk above them and slipped a small object from his coat. A coin. He flipped it once, twice, then let it roll off the edge and clink loudly near the opposite wall. The noise drew the guards instantly, weapons half raised. Eli dropped behind them like a ghost. The first man crumpled under a precise chokehold, silent, efficient. The second turned too late. Eli struck him behind the ear with the hilt of a training blade. The man fell in a heap, groaning once before going limp. Mia's eyes were wide with terror as Eli approached. She shrank back instinctively. "Protective. I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently, cutting her bonds. Her breathing slowed. She nodded. "Come on," Eli whispered. He led her out the back door, staying low beneath broken window panes and discarded crates. Within 5 minutes, they were gone. Back at the compound, the reaction was quiet, but not unimpressed. The scarred woman folded her arms. Clean, quick, no visible trace. Locke nodded. He passed, but Eli wasn't celebrating. As he sat in the debriefing room, sipping water from a plain metal cup, his mind returned to Mia's face. The fear, the trembling, the disbelief that someone might actually be there to help her. He'd seen that look before, in war zones, in refugee camps, in alleyways where no one listened to cries anymore. It haunted him in a way medals never did. Later that day, he was assigned to a real mission. No more simulations, no actors. This time it was a missing woman, 32 years old, teacher. Went to her car after a late shift and never came home. The police report was thin. No leads, no urgency, but the Phoenix network, Locke's organization, had picked up a digital trail. Surveillance footage from a gas station showed a van, license plate obscured, but the timestamp gave them a 2-minute window. Eli was dispatched solo. The van had been traced to an industrial complex on the east end of the city. He arrived just after sunset, dressed like a janitor, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. The ruse worked well enough to get him past the outer security fence. He had a blueprint memorized. The building was a hollowed-out textile factory, now repurposed for storage. He didn't buy it. Inside, he moved floor by floor, avoiding cameras, listening through walls. At last, he heard something. Soft sobbing behind a bolted door on level 3. He placed a hand against the metal. "Miss Kendra?" he said quietly. The sobbing stopped. A shuffle. Then, "Who are you?" "Someone who can get you out." A pause. Then the bolt slid open. She looked exhausted, bruised, but conscious. Eli slipped his coat around her shoulders. "We need to go," he said. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Trouble." Eli pushed her behind him and waited. 2 men rounded the corner, armed, untrained, overconfident. Eli dropped the first with a spinning elbow that shattered the man's jaw. The second fired wildly, missing by feet. Eli closed the gap and wrestled the gun away before slamming him into the concrete wall. He guided Kendra through a side exit where a vehicle waited, a contact sent by the network. She was safe. Mission complete. Back at HQ, Locke met him at the elevator. "You're quick," he said. "Controlled, not just tactical, measured." Eli shrugged. "I had a reason." Locke gave him a knowing glance. "You always do, don't you?" Eli didn't reply. He didn't need to. The missions had given him purpose again. But more importantly, they reminded him of something he'd almost lost in the years between war and wandering. His instincts were still sharp. His heart was still beating for others. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was protecting again, and this time on his own terms. That night, Eli stood on the rooftop of the compound and stared out at the city lights. He wasn't sure what tomorrow held, but for the first time in years, he didn't dread it. Down below, people were going about their lives, unaware of the shadows that threatened them, or the people like him who kept those shadows at bay. He took a deep breath and whispered to the night, "Let them come." It had been 3 weeks since Eli had taken down the kidnappers and rescued Kendra from the shadows of the abandoned textile mill. In those weeks, he had completed 4 more operations, each more complex, more silent, more morally ambiguous. Than the last, the Phoenix Network had no uniforms, no oaths, no flags, just a code of conduct and a hierarchy that was both invisible and absolute. Eli had never been asked to pledge allegiance, never even been told who was at the top. Yet every mission, every briefing, and every success confirmed that this organization was vast, global even, quiet, precise, and deadly when needed. At first, it had felt like justice. Now, it was starting to feel like something else. He stood in front of the war room's massive digital screen, arms crossed as a heat map of the city pulsed softly before him. Points of interest lit up. Surveillance zones, flagged individuals, financial movements. The system tracked patterns most governments couldn't even see. Phoenix didn't just fight crime, it anticipated it. Locke entered behind him, speaking with his usual chill calmness. "Another mission tonight. High-value courier, human trafficking. We want the asset alive." Eli turned to him. "Alive? That's new." Locke didn't smile. "We're asking questions this time. There's something bigger behind this, bigger than kidnapping girls off the street." Eli asked dryly. Locke's silence was answer enough. The target's name was Jonas Creel, a mid-level trafficker who worked under an Eastern syndicate. Phoenix had traced 5 missing women back to him in the last 6 months. Tonight, he was transporting his cargo in a reinforced black SUV across the city under the cover of a plumbing business front. Eli moved through the rain-drenched night like a shadow, tailing the vehicle from rooftops and alleys. At the corner of Wilmore and 6th, he dropped from a scaffold and landed on the moving SUV's roof. One flash grenade through the sunroof later, and the vehicle screeched to a halt. Eli pulled the rear doors open. 2 women inside, terrified. Jonas, coughing from the flash, reached for his sidearm, but Eli was faster. He grabbed the man by the collar, yanked him out, and drove a knee into his chest hard enough to crack ribs. "Tell me who you work for," Eli growled. Jonas spat blood. "You don't want to know." Eli tightened his grip. "Try me." But before the trafficker could speak, a shot rang out. Blood burst from Jonas's skull. He dropped, lifeless. Eli turned sharply, no one in sight. But he knew what that meant. Phoenix had pulled the trigger. They didn't want answers. They wanted compliance. Eli returned to HQ without a word. The rescued women were already being processed by Phoenix's outreach team, sent to safe houses, given new identities, protection, therapy. That part, at least, still made sense. But the silence around Jonas's murder disturbed him more than he expected. In the debrief room, he sat across from Locke. The older man read a file, as if the death wasn't even notable. Eli spoke first. "You said you wanted him alive." Locke didn't look up. "Change of plans." "Why?" Locke finally lifted his eyes, unbothered. "Sometimes the intel we have is enough. We don't always need confirmation." Eli's jaw tightened. "Or sometimes you already knew who he worked for." There was a flicker in Locke's eyes. Not guilt, not fear, just calculation. "You're not wrong," he said simply. Eli leaned back, crossing his arms. "You recruited me with this big idea of justice, helping the ones who fall through the cracks. But you knew all along." Locke didn't deny it. "We do good, Eli, better than any broken system out there. But we don't show all our cards, because some cards are rotten. Some players you can't expose until you catch them making their own move." Eli narrowed his eyes. "You don't want justice. You want leverage." Locke smiled faintly. "We want balance. If we expose the wrong person at the wrong time, the fallout destroys innocent lives. We push when the board is ready. Until then, we control the variables." Eli stood. "You're not protecting people, you're managing them." "You're free to leave," Locke said, "but you won't, because you still believe in what we do, and because you know, out there alone, you'd save one person at a time. In here, you can save thousands." Eli stared at him, the weight of truth and compromise pressing hard on his shoulders. Then he walked out without another word. That night, Eli stood on the rooftop of the Phoenix compound once again, staring down at the endless city beneath. The lights seemed colder now, more distant. His thoughts were a cyclone. Truth, lies, mission, purpose. He'd always known that war blurred lines. He hadn't expected the same thing from justice. In the shadows of his mind, a memory surfaced. Afghanistan, 2012. A young interpreter named Hamid, loyal, brave. He'd saved Eli's life twice. One day, Hamid disappeared. A week later, Eli learned from a contact that Hamid had been handed over to a local warlord, sacrificed for a truce. That was the first time Eli realized not all allies play fair. Now Phoenix was echoing that same betrayal, just in sharper suits and quieter voices. But something else rose inside him too, a decision. He began his own quiet investigation. No files, no queries on the internal systems. Just old-fashioned digging. Eli started with names, victims who vanished even after Phoenix claimed they'd been rescued. Men like Jonas Creel, who were labeled as neutralized, yet were never publicly reported dead. He visited a former Phoenix analyst named Mira, a woman he'd once briefly met during his intake week. She lived in hiding now under a new identity. When he found her, she greeted him with cautious relief. "I knew someone would come," she said. Eli cut to the chase. "What's the truth?" Mira hesitated, then handed him a drive. "You won't like it. Phoenix doesn't just shut down syndicates. They take over the supply chains, repurpose them, their own version of control." Eli stared at the drive. "Why?" "Because chaos breeds power, and if they hold the leash, they think they can rebuild society from the inside." Eli left her cabin in silence, the flash drive burning like ice in his pocket. Back at HQ, he reviewed the data on a secure offline terminal. He saw names, agents listed as lost in action, who were in fact detained in Phoenix's own black sites. He saw video footage, one of Locke smiling and shaking hands with a cartel middleman he claimed to have dismantled, and worse, financial ledgers showing money laundering through Phoenix-owned shell companies. It wasn't just infiltration, it was assimilation. Eli knew now. Phoenix wasn't fixing the system. It had become its own empire, hidden behind benevolence, and he had helped build it. The next morning, Eli walked into Locke's office with the drive in hand. Locke was already waiting. "I figured it was you," he said without turning from the window. "You figured I'd find the truth?" Eli asked. "No, I figured you wouldn't stop looking." He turned, gaze steady. "You were always going to be the variable we couldn't control. That's why I kept you close. You made me part of your machine." Locke nodded. "And yet here you are, more dangerous now than ever." Eli placed the drive on the desk. "I'm not here to threaten you." "Then why are you here?" Eli's voice was low, calm. "To give you one chance. Shut it down, burn the corruption from inside, or I walk out of here and bring the whole thing down myself." Locke exhaled slowly. "We both know that if you expose us, a dozen other operations like Phoenix will rise in our place. This isn't about purity. It's about choosing the devil who knows how to hold the line." Eli walked to the door, pausing only once. "I won't be your devil." And he left. But he didn't go underground. He went deeper. He began gathering allies, former agents, survivors, hackers, whistleblowers, people like Mira. Together they would do what Phoenix pretended to do. But for real this time. No hidden chains, no compromise, just truth, sharpened like a blade, because Eli had found his line, and now he was going to draw it in fire. The decision to leave Phoenix wasn't a clean break. It was a slow unraveling. Eli couldn't simply vanish. Too many eyes, too many traps. Instead, he adapted, played the role of loyal operative by day, while planting seeds of rebellion in the shadows. He knew now that Phoenix was not a shelter, it was a crucible, one that turned broken people into obedient weapons. But Eli was done being forged. He would be the fire this time. His first step was building a circle of trust, not followers, not soldiers, allies. He began with Mira. The former analyst had seen too much, and more importantly, understood how Phoenix operated from the inside. Her ability to manipulate data streams, scrub surveillance records, and reroute mission logs made her irreplaceable. "You're going to get yourself killed," she warned him, leaning over the flickering laptop in her underground workspace. Eli sat across from her, his presence calm but immovable. "I'll die if I keep doing nothing," he said. Mira nodded without argument. "Then let's make sure it counts." They created a dark node, a completely disconnected system not linked to any known digital infrastructure. Their own command center, separate from Phoenix's omnipresent network. They called it Echo Black. It became the silent brain of a movement. Next came Kara. She was an infiltration specialist, a ghost in human skin. Phoenix had sent her on dozens of silent missions to eliminate or extract persons of interest, efficient, ruthless, but something in her had fractured when a child died in a crossfire Phoenix refused to acknowledge. Eli approached her quietly during a staged training exercise. "I know what they made you do in Istanbul," he said, passing her a folder without breaking stride. Kara flipped it open later that night. It contained photos, logs, names, proof that the incident had been orchestrated, not accidental. She showed up at his safe house 2 nights later. "I want in," she whispered. Over time, the circle grew. Luca, a logistics coordinator who secretly diverted Phoenix funds into safe havens for families of disappeared agents. Jalen, a former drone pilot turned digital watchdog, who now helped identify Phoenix surveillance blind spots. Naomi, once part of the Phoenix outreach program, now rerouting rescued victims into Echo Black's protection network. Each person had a reason. Each had seen the mask slip. What they lacked in numbers, they made up for in resolve. This was not a war yet. It was an infection in the system. Quiet, spreading. Eli moved with increasing precision. He still performed Phoenix missions, still reported to Locke, still played the role. But in the background, Echo Black rerouted critical intelligence, intercepted sensitive communications, and, most importantly, began rescuing individuals Phoenix intended to silence. Victims Phoenix deemed too dangerous were hidden instead of erased. Whistleblowers Phoenix intended to blackmail were extracted and relocated. For every mission Phoenix believed it had completed, Echo Black unraveled a thread behind the curtain. And yet, Eli knew it couldn't last. Phoenix wasn't stupid. They were patient, and somewhere in the quiet heart of their machine, Locke was watching. One night, Eli returned to the Phoenix compound and found a file sitting on his bunk. It wasn't labeled, no classification, just a red wax seal with a Phoenix insignia. Inside were photographs, all of them taken within the last 3 days. Each one showed a member of Echo Black. Kara buying groceries, Mira entering her hideout, Naomi on her motorcycle, Luca holding his daughter's hand. The last photo was of Eli himself, standing beside an ATM, head turned just slightly, as if he knew he was being watched. Beneath the photographs was a single typed sentence. "We see the echo. It's time for the silence." Eli didn't panic. Instead, he made a call. A burner. Signal Mira had set up, encrypted and untraceable, 1 ring, 2, then a click. "We're compromised," he said simply. "We move now?" Mira asked. "No," Eli replied. "We anchor." "What?" "We don't scatter. We push back." Mira was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. Eli called an emergency Echo Black meeting in an abandoned subway maintenance station. A relic from before the war on organized crime pushed urban decay underground. The air was thick with rust and tension. "We've been exposed," Eli told them. "Phoenix has eyes on every one of you." Jalen looked around nervously. "So what now? We go dark again?" Eli shook his head. No, we go loud. He unrolled a map across the rusted steel table. Dozens of red dots marked Phoenix sub-facilities. Safe houses, extraction centers, surveillance nests. We hit 3 of these within 48 hours. Data extraction, public leaks, and evidence drops. Nothing explosive, just truth. Naomi raised an eyebrow. That's a suicide move. No, Eli said. It's pressure. We take the initiative. They expect us to hide. Let's show them. We don't need to. Silence hung in the air for a moment. Then Kara leaned forward. I'm in, Jalen nodded. Let's make some noise. The next 48 hours shattered Phoenix's illusion of control. Kara infiltrated a Phoenix re-education site, posing as a defector, transmitting video of illegal interrogations and coercive manipulation. Luca leaked financial documents from within the logistics vaults, showing Phoenix's money laundering through non-profit fronts. Naomi and Mira hacked the broadcast feeds of 2 major news networks, releasing redacted footage of survivors Phoenix claimed were dead, now alive and safe under Echo Black's protection. It wasn't enough to take Phoenix down, but it was enough to make them blink. Back at headquarters, Locke watched the reports roll in. 3 breaches in 2 days. Controlled, precise, impossible to trace. Still, he knew. It had Eli's signature. He lit a cigarette, eyes narrowed. He didn't summon Eli that day. Instead, he sent him a message. No words, just a red envelope. Empty. The meaning was clear. This is war. That night, as Eli stood alone outside his safe house, a whisper of wind drifted across the alley. He heard a car drive off in the distance, then footsteps behind him. Mira appeared, holding a tablet. They're purging internal systems, locking everything. Down, preparing for a full sweep. Eli nodded. They're scared, he said. She stared at him. No, they're desperate. Which makes them dangerous. He looked up at the night sky. They always were. A pause. Then he spoke again. It's time. For what? She asked. Eli turned to face her, eyes like steel behind ice, to break the machine. Phoenix had always thrived in the shadows. Its claws buried so deeply into institutions, its name never appeared in public documents, only whispered in code across digital corridors and encrypted feeds. But now, with Echo Black's bold moves drawing blood, the veil had thinned, and Eli intended to tear it off completely. He knew they couldn't destroy Phoenix with fire. It had been born from fire. But if they could expose it, reveal the rot. At its core, they could collapse its illusion of authority. Tyrants fall not because they are slain, but because people see them. He just needed to know where it began. It started with a name, Adrian Voss, a ghost in corporate history. Voss had no digital fingerprint before 2005, and yet, in the 2 decades since, his influence surged through military, contracting, cybersecurity, and private intelligence firms. On paper, he was just a financier, a shadow investor in humanitarian startups and crisis response units, but buried in Mira's decrypted data logs was something that chilled them both. Project Phoenix. Initial framework. Signed. Approved. By Voss, directive, construct adaptive conflict entity for subversive engagement. In simpler terms, Voss hadn't just funded Phoenix, he created it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eli paced inside the command center, an abandoned communications hub beneath an old water treatment plant, while Mira scrolled through terabytes of shredded intel. There's more, she muttered. He funded neurological reconditioning, programs in Eastern Europe, black site behavioral labs in Alaska, and this. She tapped the screen. A single image loaded. A much younger Eli, restrained in a steel chair, blood on his temple, eyes wild. His file. Preoperative psychological conditioning. Phase 1. Mira read aloud. Subject 014A. Eli stared at the screen without blinking. I was a number to them. Mira didn't reply. There was no comfort to give, only resolve. They traced Voss to a biotech firm called Helix Dynamics, located just outside Washington, D.C. On the surface, it was a medical startup working on neuroprosthetics. But financial trails painted a different picture. Funds moved between shell companies, covering grants to facilities known for psychological warfare research. It was a nest of lies wrapped in philanthropy, and Eli knew the only way forward was to go straight into the hornet's nest. He would need eyes inside, Kara volunteered. Kara walked through the front doors of Helix Dynamics, posing as a cybersecurity consultant. A forged identity, a clean resume, and her ability to mimic any accent helped her get inside in less than 48 hours. She quickly confirmed their suspicions. Helix had a basement facility, one not listed in any building plans. Employees whispered about it, calling it the Vault. You want to know what makes Phoenix agents so calm under torture? She whispered to Eli through a secure line. They're modified. Behavioral inhibitors, neural dampeners, tech pioneered here. Is Voss on site? Eli asked. No, but I found something worse. A pause. They're creating new versions of us. Programmable operatives, no memories, no morality. Just obedience. Eli clenched his jaw. It wasn't just about stopping Phoenix anymore. It was about preventing what they were becoming. Naomi and Jalen began digging into Helix's communications. A pattern emerged. Secure messages routed through the same relay hub every 3 days, all marked with Voss's internal signature. Their origin: an estate in the Virginia countryside. No security firm listed, no staff, just acres of private woodland, and a mansion hidden behind biometric gates. Jalen patched into a satellite feed. Naomi enhanced it, and there he was, Adrian Voss, silver hair, sharp suit, standing beside a woman in a lab coat, discussing something over a glass balcony. Voss was real, and he was reachable. But Echo Black couldn't just strike. They needed truth, not revenge. And for that, they needed to get inside. Luca proposed a plan. Using stolen credentials from a Phoenix regional director, they would pose as asset evaluators for a new private initiative Voss was funding. A cover that would get Mira and Eli through the outer perimeter. The rest of Echo Black would stay mobile, ready to extract or detonate every file connected to Voss's network the moment they were inside. Everything hinged on precision. Everything hinged on the truth. Eli hadn't worn a suit in years. It felt alien, like pretending to be human again. But as the armored SUV rolled up the gravel path toward Voss's estate, he adjusted his tie and stared at his reflection in the window. The man looking back wasn't a soldier anymore. He was an avenger. The gates opened, and they were welcomed by polite mechanical assistants. Biometric scans passed. Voice prints matched. Everything was designed for compliance and elegance. Voss greeted them in a glass atrium, surrounded by curated plants and digital koi swimming through a projection pool. "Welcome," he said warmly, extending a hand. "To the future." Eli shook. His hand, Let's see what it holds. The tour was a maze of luxury and technological obscenity. Rooms filled with neuromapping equipment, emotion regulators, surgical implants designed to suppress memory centers, tools used to break people into obedient components. And at the heart of it all, Project Regenesis, a program built to mass-produce emotionless operatives. Not trained soldiers, not volunteers, children, born and bred for obedience, no families, no history, just assignments. Mira gasped quietly as she read the blueprints. This is indoctrination by design. Voss stood beside them, hands clasped behind. His back. It's the next step in evolutionary intelligence, he said calmly. Remove fear, remove pain, remove hesitation. Eli looked him dead in the eyes. And what's left? Efficiency, Voss replied without shame. They were led to a private library, where Voss sat across from them over vintage wine and digital displays of his empire. I imagine you're wondering why you were brought in, he said. Eli didn't. Blink, because we're the best at what we do. Voss smiled. No, because I wanted you to see it. The world is dying, Mr. Archer. Governments are fractured, people are soft. What I've built is order. Mira glanced at Eli, silently asking permission. He gave her the nod. She activated the uplink from her implant. Jalen and Naomi began pulling data from every server connected to the estate. They had minutes. Voss kept speaking, praising himself as a visionary. He didn't notice Mira's subtle gestures, or the way Eli had shifted closer to the door until the alarm went off, a soft, chirping tone. Voss's eyes narrowed. What did you do? He asked sharply. Eli stood. I saw the machine, Voss. I learned how it eats people, and now I'm going to shut it down. Voss stood too, his calm mask cracking. You're already too late. The windows darkened. Security drones deployed. The estate shifted from elegance to fortress. Eli and Mira ran. They made it to the garden corridor just as the estate system went into full lockdown. Kara's voice crackled through Eli's calm. Extraction point is compromised. I've got 3 drones on me and a heat scan incoming. Keep moving, Eli ordered. Jalen, initiate protocol blackout. Wipe everything. Already done. Jalen replied. Eli grabbed Mira's hand and ducked behind a statue as a drone zipped past overhead. They made it to the underground garage just as Luca's emergency evac team blew through the gate with a modified cargo truck. Go! Luca yelled. Eli and Mira leaped in. Behind them the estate caught fire. Naomi had triggered a failsafe. The exposed data was rigged with a virus that corrupted every system it touched. Years of secrets melted in seconds. Voss stood in the flames, watching the sky turn red. They got out, with proof, with names, with faces, and with the story of Phoenix's origin. Eli stared at the drive Mira handed him later that night. The entire history of Phoenix, the experiments, the victims, the evolution of control. This was what they had needed from the beginning. Not destruction, exposure. And now, with Voss revealed and the machine gasping for breath, the next step was clear. Eli turned to the team. We release it all. The truth, once freed, was impossible to silence. Within hours of Mira's data dump, the files spread like wildfire. News outlets, whistleblower sites, encrypted forums. The world was no longer blind to the shadow war waged beneath its feet. Phoenix had been named, its roots exposed. Adrian Voss, once a phantom, was now public enemy number 1. But for every move Echo Black made in the light, Phoenix made 3 in the dark. and one of those was already inside. Eli stood in a safe house overlooking the Potomac River, watching. A digital map bloom with media hotspots. New York, Paris, Johannesburg, Tokyo. Every blinking dot was another piece of the truth being consumed, debated, dissected. Echo Black had struck a nerve. "This is just the beginning," Mira said behind him. "Once the public sees what's happening, the pressure will build. They'll demand answers." Eli nodded, though his jaw remained tight. "They won't just demand answers," he said. "They'll want blood." He turned to her, and Voss knows it. At a Phoenix-controlled substation in Nevada, Voss stood before a high-security monitor, reviewing footage of the breach. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned. "He's turned public sentiment into a weapon," his assistant muttered. "Let them rage," Voss said. "We've accounted for worse." He tapped a command on the screen. "Initiate Judas Protocol." A new interface loaded, listing Phoenix's embedded assets. He selected one. Activate her. Back in the field, Echo Black's momentum surged. Offers of protection came from rogue intelligence agents, disillusioned soldiers, even members of the press. But momentum breeds complacency, and that was exactly what Phoenix was counting on. Naomi first noticed it in the code. Subtle anomalies in their secure channels, micro-surges of delay, packet reshuffling, odd redundancy triggers. Nothing catastrophic, but wrong. She flagged it for Jalen. He dismissed it. Probably just packet noise from all the increased traffic. "Our nodes are being pinged non-stop now." She let it go. That was the first mistake. Meanwhile, Kara was tasked with infiltrating a private auction in Istanbul, a known front for Phoenix's human asset trade. Her objective was to confirm whether Phoenix had begun selling Regenesis prototypes to foreign buyers. What she found was worse. Children, barely teenagers, wired with biometric restraints, eyes hollow. Kara recorded the whole thing, sent the data. To Mira, Eli watched the footage in silence. "I want names," he said. "Buyers, sellers, every single one." He leaned back. "And then we burn it all." But as the signal transmitted across Echo Black's network, an invisible hand intercepted it and rerouted the file. The breach wasn't discovered until 2 days later. Jalen, reviewing a codebase for an unrelated diagnostic issue, traced a corrupted signal bouncing through an encrypted loop. It led to a dormant subroutine no one had seen before, and it was transmitting data outward to Phoenix, son of a... He muttered, heart racing. He pulled the logs. The signal had originated from within Echo Black's central comms server. Someone had rerouted Kara's Istanbul drop, and the leak had been ongoing for months. Eli gathered the team in the command chamber of their Montana outpost. His face was grim. Mira stood at his side, arms crossed. "We've been compromised." The words dropped like ice. "We don't know how far it goes yet," Jalen added. "But whoever it is, they've had access to tactical routes, op files, and personal logs." Silence. Stretched. "Someone here is feeding Voss." Suspicion crept like poison. Eyes darted. Conversations thinned. Trust, once unspoken and absolute, was now questioned with every nod, every silence, every averted gaze. Mira, pragmatic as ever, launched. A zero-trust lockdown. No digital comms without biometric validation. No shared access protocols. Every outgoing transmission had to be manually approved, but even with the safeguards, one truth remained. The traitor was still among them. It was Naomi who finally pieced it together. Late at night, exhausted and jittery, She sat reviewing calmly. Logs, cross-referencing timestamps and biometric entries. One sequence stood out, a midnight access spike to a vault containing unfiltered Regenesis blueprints. Accessed from a node that should have been locked during that hour, and the biometric signature, Mira. The confrontation was swift. Eli called Mira into the ops room. Alone, he showed her the logs. Mira stared at the screen, silent. Then she looked. Up, you think this was me? I don't want to, Eli said, but I need to know what's going on. Her face was unreadable. I didn't make that access. Someone spoofed my credentials and bypassed the biometric? Her silence stretched. You know I couldn't have, she said. I know what the data says. Something passed between them. An ache, a fracture. And then Mira said something that made Eli freeze. Ask Jalen who coded the biometric vault. Eli did, and Jalen's answer stopped him cold. I did, he admitted sheepishly. Years ago, but only Mira and I had level 7 override access. Eli narrowed his eyes. What about back doors? Jalen hesitated. There's one, but it's dead. A failsafe I installed in case of a data crash. Never used it. Eli stared at him. You ever run diagnostics on it? No. Why would I? Eli's jaw clenched. Because someone did. They traced the anomaly to a tiny recursive loop buried in the failsafe. Jalen hadn't installed it. Someone modified it later. And the timestamp? 3 days after a mission in Prague, where Naomi had disappeared from sight for 7 hours without explanation. Eli called her in. When she entered, her smile was faint, practiced. You wanted to see me? Eli didn't respond. He simply turned, the monitor toward her, displaying the breach logs, the biometric spoof trail, the corrupted failsafe loop. Her expression didn't falter, not even a twitch. You were one of them, Eli said quietly. She sighed. I was one of you. And then, in a movement so fast it barely registered, Naomi pulled a flash grenade from her belt and dropped it to the floor. The room burst into white. By the time the light faded, she was gone. Chaos erupted across the base. Jalen shut down all external nodes. Luca secured the perimeter. Kara raced to the vault to confirm what, if anything, Naomi had taken. She hadn't gone after data. She'd gone after Echo Black's mission ledger, a complete list of every surviving civilian they'd helped, and every known Phoenix agent flipped to their side, their entire resistance network, now in Voss's hands. Later that night, Eli stood alone beneath the stars. The sky stretched above, vast and uncaring. He had known betrayal. He had felt it on the battlefield, in the corridors of Phoenix, in the eyes of handlers who swore they were protecting freedom. But this one cut deeper. Naomi had been family, and now she would be the blade Voss used to cut them down. Mira stepped. Beside him, her voice quiet. She's already uploaded part of the ledger. 3 safe houses have been compromised. Eli didn't move. More will follow. He turned to her. Then we beat them to it. We go dark. We change the pattern. She looked at him. What do we do now? Eli stared at the sky one last time, then back to her. We become what they fear. As dawn approached in the icy silence of northern Montenegro, a storm was building, not of weather but of reckoning. Deep beneath the mountains near Kotor, where geothermal energy masked forbidden experiments, Phoenix's core facility pulsed with the quiet arrogance of untouchable power. For years, this final bastion had remained hidden beneath a civilian energy plant, protected by international oversight and buried under layers of manipulation. But now, Echo Black was done hiding. Scarred by betrayal and fueled by a fire that no storm could extinguish, they prepared to strike. This was not revenge, it was necessity. Operation Winterglass, as Jalen named it, would be their last stand. No fallbacks, no extraction. Either Phoenix collapsed or they would. In the cold stillness of an abandoned satellite station reactivated deep in Iceland, Mira, Jalen, Kara, Luca, and Eli built their plan with the precision of surgeons and the heart of soldiers who had buried too many of their own. Shay, the former Phoenix engineer who had escaped the experiments years ago, brought blueprints and buried guilt, both of which would prove crucial. Phoenix's inner sanctum, they discovered, was not just a fortress, but a mind, a central AI, network that controlled legions of programmable soldiers, data flows, and something more sinister, a prototype capable of rewriting human morality. If it was completed, free will could become a relic of the past. The plan was exact: create a diversion, breach the vault, sever Voss's control, and broadcast Phoenix's crimes to the world before a nuclear failsafe wiped the entire facility. Clean. Kara and Luca deployed decoy drones in the North Corridor, mimicking heat and human movement, baiting automated defenses to open fire on shadows. Mira and Eli, entering from geothermal cooling shafts laced with boiling mist and rusted pipes, slipped silently into the facility's steel lungs. Jalen, remotely linked through a secure uplink, deployed a worm, an AI counterconstruct called Shepherd, designed to exploit Phoenix's operating logic, mimic its decision tree, and force the system to quarantine itself from within. The moment Shepherd began infiltrating Phoenix's mind, the atmosphere shifted. The lights dimmed, alarms ignited like firecrackers, and from the inner sanctum, the Ash Choir awakened. Phoenix's elite guard, biologically enhanced, speechless, merciless, moved through the corridors like an ancient curse. Mira and Eli reached the heart of the facility moments before containment protocols sealed them in. There, in the core, chamber surrounded by humming servers and the electric pulse of billions of stolen lives, stood Adrian Voss, unshaken, expectant. He greeted them not with fear, but with a sermon. He believed himself a savior, not a tyrant, and argued that obedience, not freedom, preserved society. People don't want choice, he said. They want peace. I gave it to them. But Eli had no time for sermons. Mira bypassed the DNA lock using a vial of Voss's own frozen blood, recovered years ago during an Echo Black raid. As the chamber opened, Voss activated a purge command. Jalen, watching from the uplink terminal, shouted that Phoenix was beginning a total wipe. Names, identities, operational logs, all would vanish within seconds. Suddenly, 3 members of the Ash Choir dropped into the chamber like blades falling from the ceiling. What followed was not a firefight, but a blur of raw survival. Mira engaged one assassin in close combat, ducking beneath bone-shattering strikes and countering with lethal precision. Eli met his attacker with the force of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Kara and Luca, monitoring from the flanks, detonated electromagnetic pulses that drew most of the choir away. But inside the vault, chaos reigned. Voss retreated to his console, fingers dancing across holographic controls, initiating the final system cleanse. Mira, bleeding but focused, drove her blade into the chest of her opponent just as a gunshot rang out. Voss had fired. The bullet struck Mira's side. She fell to the floor, breathless, blood soaking her combat vest. Eli's world contracted into a moment of pure clarity. He lunged. The second bullet missed. Voss staggered backward as Eli tackled him against the mainframe, sending sparks and glass shards cascading across the chamber. They fought amidst dying servers, and Voss, still convinced of his superiority, screamed about how society would crumble without his order. But Eli, eyes blazing, pinned him down and spat, "No more guards!" Jalen's voice crackled through the comms. 10 seconds to purge complete." In that instant, Eli saw the final choice. He jammed the shepherd worm directly into the primary core, bypassing encryption, and sent it straight into Phoenix's neural net. The entire system stuttered, then roared. Sparks burst from every surface. The chamber became a storm of light and sound. The purge halted. Phoenix's AI began to fragment, infected by a mirror of its own design. Voss screamed as his interface short-circuited, feedback looping through his neural implants. His body collapsed in a twitching heap, defeated by the very machine he had once controlled. Around them, the ash choir fell, like puppets whose strings had been severed, and above them, the surface antenna ignited with life. All across the globe, screens, phones, TVs, city monitors flickered on, hijacked by the satellite uplink Jalen had prepared. Echo Black's entire archive, uncensored, streamed live to the world. Not just evidence of Phoenix's crimes, but proof of the hidden war waged against freedom. Civilians watched in stunned horror as torture footage, falsified propaganda, and mind control schematics unfolded. It was a global awakening, a truth bomb that no one could ignore. Meanwhile, Eli lifted Mira, barely conscious, and carried her through the burning corridors as the mountain began to tremble. Kara and Luca arrived in time to clear their exit path. They emerged just before sunrise, the first rays of light. Piercing the shattered compound behind them, there were no celebrations, no cheers, only breath, only silence. The kind that follows the fall of tyrants. Echo Black didn't win a war. They ended a system, but in that ending, a new question began to form. Now that the truth was free, who would shape what came next? The sun that rose over the shattered remains of the Phoenix compound was not the same sun that had watched over the world the day before. It was brighter, not in its light, but in what that light now illuminated. Beneath the scorched peaks of Montenegro, Phoenix was dead. Its corridors silent, its servers fried, its leaders either captured, vanished, or buried beneath steel and stone. But the war Echo Black had fought was never about a single building or a single name. It was about a shadow that had shaped governments, rewritten narratives, and stolen lives. That shadow, for the first time in decades, was exposed, and the world was watching. Across continents, the broadcast that Jalen had unleashed continued to ripple like a storm across calm waters. Governments scrambled. News agencies that once played lapdog to Phoenix's subsidiaries found themselves chasing ghosts in their own backrooms. Entire regimes were toppled overnight, their roots revealed to have grown in poisoned soil. Bank accounts tied to shell corporations were frozen, investigations launched, whistleblowers emboldened. The people, once deafened by lies, now heard truth in its rawest, ugliest form. What shocked them most was not the technology or the experiments. It was the silence they had lived under for so long. The realization that they had looked away while monsters wore human skin and called themselves protectors. Mira, though wounded, survived. Her recovery was slow and filled with pain, but she bore it with the same quiet endurance that had defined her for years. Eli, who had once wandered the streets with nothing but a broken past and a soldier's discipline, never left her side. In the weeks that followed, Echo Black disbanded, not from fracture but from fulfillment. They had completed what they set out to do. Jalen erased every trace of their tactical operations, wiping digital fingerprints and deleting their call signs from every network. Their mission had always been about dismantling the machine, not inheriting it. Luca returned to Argentina to help rebuild neighborhoods Phoenix's proxies had destabilized. Kara joined an international oversight group formed to prosecute human rights violations, where her knowledge of Phoenix's legal cover-ups became the keystone for dozens of successful indictments. Eli and Mira were offered medals, honors, and interviews. They declined them all. For them, the war was never about recognition. It was about redemption. Instead, they disappeared into the background of the very world they had helped save. But they didn't vanish into obscurity. They started something, quiet yet profound, a foundation for trauma survivors, veterans, and former test subjects of the Phoenix program. It wasn't flashy, it didn't make headlines, but its doors were open, always, and those who walked through them found something the world rarely offered: understanding and a path forward. In Geneva, a tribunal was established, a hybrid court of law and public broadcast. Phoenix executives who hadn't fled were put on trial. Some tried to deny everything, hiding behind the complexity of their systems. Others broke under questioning, revealing how deeply the corruption had spread. But perhaps the most impactful moment came, not from evidence or confession, but from a simple act. A young woman named Aaliyah, who had been trafficked into a Phoenix experiment camp when she was only 13, walked into the courtroom with a photo of her younger brother, now presumed dead. She placed it on the bench, said nothing, and left. That image echoed louder than any testimony. It reminded the world of what had truly been lost. Not just documents, not just identities, but innocence. As the trials dragged on and convictions mounted, the global public began to ask deeper questions. Who had funded Phoenix in its early days? Which nations turned a blind eye? Why did it take a rogue group of outcasts to bring it down when institutions failed for decades? These weren't comfortable questions, but they were necessary. In Berlin, crowds protested outside embassies, linked to Phoenix's founding. In Washington, congressional hearings were open to re-evaluate surveillance laws and military privatization. In Tokyo, students held vigils for those who had vanished into black sites the world never acknowledged until now. The shift was not instantaneous. The wheels of justice turned slowly. But they were turning, and with them something else began to awaken: accountability. Back in Iceland, where the final plan had been born in secrecy, the old Echo Black safe house remained intact. It had been cleared of weapons, intelligence, and tech, but one wall remained untouched, a memorial, dozens of names etched into steel, names of those who had died in the shadows long before the world ever knew there was a war. Mira visited that wall once, months after the dust had settled. She ran her fingers along each name. Some she had fought beside, others she had only known through whispers. "We did it," she whispered, not expecting a response. But she didn't need one. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of memory, of legacy. Eli stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He had changed too. The man who once bore every scar like a wound now wore them like armor. Not proud, but purposeful. "They can't rewrite the story anymore," he said. "Not after this." She nodded. It was true. For the first time, the world had a full account of what had been done, and by whom. It could no longer be erased. Not by money, not by time. Elsewhere, Jalen, who had chosen exile over recognition, uploaded a final message onto the darknet, signed only with his old Echo ID. It was addressed not to allies, but to the next generation. "Don't wait for permission to fight injustice. It doesn't come. You don't need to wear a uniform to be a soldier. Just a conscience." Those words within days were spray-painted on walls in cities from London to Jakarta. It became a kind of movement, a reminder that truth, once unleashed, did not fade. It multiplied. The fall of Phoenix became a textbook case in universities, a story in films, a symbol etched into the public consciousness. But for those who had lived it, it was more than history. It was a wound that would always ache, a ghost that would linger not in nightmares, but in quiet moments when the world felt too quiet and silence too loud. Yet even in that pain, there was peace, because they had won, not perfectly, not without cost, but truth had prevailed, and justice, however delayed, had arrived. Years later, when the world no longer spoke Phoenix's name with fear, but with anger and resolve, a statue was erected in a small park near Reykjavik. It bore no names, no flag, just a hooded figure walking forward with a broken chain in one hand and a child's hand in the other. The plaque beneath it read simply, "For those who chose truth over silence." Years had passed since the name Phoenix was spoken in whispers or with dread. Time had a strange way of softening even the sharpest wounds, but the world hadn't forgotten. It had transformed. What once lurked in the shadows had been dragged into the light. Courtrooms had finished their sentences. Victims had spoken their truths. Entire governments had reshaped their security policies. International human rights charters had been amended, with provisions bearing the legacy of what Echo Black had uncovered. But in the quiet aftermath, as headlines shifted and public attention moved to new crises, those who had truly lived the war against Phoenix found themselves navigating a different kind of battlefield, the one that came after justice. Eli, now nearly unrecognizable from the gaunt veteran who once slept under bridges, lived in a modest coastal village in Northern Ireland. His house, tucked between windswept cliffs and sheep-covered hills, was simple. The world had offered him wealth, awards, even political positions. He turned them all down. What he wanted could never be bought: peace. And in that small house, among the salty winds and misty mornings, he found it. Yet his days were never idle. He worked with at-risk youth in nearby towns, guiding boys who could have easily ended up like he once did, forgotten, angry, invisible. He didn't lecture. He listened. Sometimes that was all they needed. Mira had taken a different path. After recovering fully, she moved to Sweden and joined an international trauma research institute. There she didn't just tell her story, she helped build systems to prevent it from happening again. Her insights were painful, but invaluable. Survivors who had once refused to speak to doctors opened up to her, not because she had the right words, but because she had the right silence. She knew what it meant to have a soul scraped raw, and how to build a new one in its place. She became a quiet legend in academic circles. No one dared publish a study on trauma recovery without referencing her work. Luca's journey was perhaps The most poetic. He returned to Buenos Aires, not to hide but to rebuild. The community center he opened was named after his sister, Isabella. Inside there were classrooms, a kitchen, and a rooftop garden. Kids came to learn, to eat, to dream. He ran it with military precision, but a father's heart. He rarely spoke of Echo Black or Phoenix, but every Friday he lit a candle in the chapel corner, one for every name he couldn't save. The wall behind it slowly filled with photos of children, each one a life redirected. His victory was not in taking down a monster, but in ensuring another never rose in its place. Kara, the sharp-witted lawyer who once danced through Phoenix's legal defenses, found herself working at the United Nations. She led a task force on ethical AI and biotech, ensuring no government or corporation could ever exploit the gray zones Phoenix once thrived in. Her presence alone was a warning. The world might forget, but she wouldn't. Her speeches, laced with legal fire and cold truths, became viral across social media. She was both admired and feared, but to those who knew her privately, she remained the same, haunted, determined, fiercely loyal. Once a month, she visited a quiet cafe in London, where she would open a handwritten letter and read it in silence. It was from Jalen. As for Jalen, his physical location remained unknown. There were rumors. Some claimed he was living in an ashram. In India, others said he had joined a resistance movement in Myanmar. One tabloid even suggested he was dead, but those closest to him knew better. He was out there, watching, coding, tracking. Every so often, a leak would surface, an encrypted message or classified document signaling his ongoing work. The last confirmed sighting was in Romania, where an illegal child labor network linked to a former Phoenix subsidiary was exposed overnight. The story vanished from news cycles in days, but the perpetrators were arrested within hours. That was Jalen's signature: impact, not attention. The foundation Eli and Mira had started flourished. It expanded across 10 countries, with branches offering therapy, job training, legal aid, and more. Former Phoenix test subjects who had once lived in hiding now worked as counselors. Veterans from Black Ops units taught young people discipline and self-respect, not violence. The motto engraved on every doorway read, "We begin again." It wasn't a catchy slogan, it was a truth. The world had almost ended for these people, and now they were building a new one from the ashes. But even peace carried its moments of reckoning. One autumn afternoon, Eli received a visitor, a teenage girl with wary eyes and a quiet voice. She carried a folder, worn at the edges, filled with photos and documents. Her mother, a former Phoenix subject, had died years ago under mysterious circumstances. The girl had discovered files linking her mother's DNA to a prototype project that had never been publicly acknowledged. She didn't want revenge. She wanted understanding. And Eli, though older and slower, took up her case like it was the first day of war. It reminded him that while the structure had fallen, its roots could still sprout if not watched carefully. That night he called Mira. "They're not all gone," he said. "I know," she replied softly, "but we are still here." It wasn't a call to arms. It was a promise. In another part of the world, a documentary titled The Shadow War premiered at Cannes. It was based on Echo Black's mission, told not with dramatized flair, but with aching authenticity. Survivors gave testimony. Journalists pieced together timelines. The story moved audiences to tears and rage. It wasn't just a film, it was a reckoning. Eli and Mira were invited to attend, but declined. Instead, They watched it on a projector in a community hall, surrounded by the people they now lived to protect. When the credits rolled, there was no applause, only silence, reverent honoring. By now, children had been born after the fall of Phoenix. They would grow up in a world shaped by the fire and courage of people they might never know. Schools taught them about whistleblowers, ethical resistance, and digital rights. Textbooks bore the names of Kara, Jalen, Mira, Luca, and Eli, not as superheroes, but as citizens who had stood up when it mattered. Their legacy wasn't in monuments, it was in the systems they disrupted, the lives they saved, the future they made possible. One winter morning, Eli stood on the cliff behind his home, overlooking the endless grey-blue ocean. His hands were weathered, his back slightly hunched, but his eyes were clear. In the distance, seagulls danced against the wind. He reached into his coat and pulled out a letter, unsigned, unsealed. It was from Jalen, or so he believed. It said only this: "The world turned because we pushed. Don't let it stop." Eli folded it carefully and tucked it back into his coat. He turned toward the small path that led back to the village, where a group of boys waited at the training field. There was still work to do. Not all battles were loud, not all heroes wore war paint, and not all wars ended with peace. But this one had, for now. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.